Hi, everyone. This is another episode of Carolyn Talks for those who here's what happened podcast. And today I'm joined by a special guest, writer and director Shatara Michelle Ford. And we're going to discuss her debut feature film, Test Pattern, which I think is an amazing film that discusses race, sexism, assault, how the government fails citizens, especially women, with regards to testing and medical procedures. And we're gonna get into all of the wonderful aspects of the film, such as the cinematography, which I think was like really well done, and her use of silence. And I'm gonna ask Shatara to introduce herself, and then we'll get into the film. So, Shatara.
Hi. I'm Shatara Michelle Ford. I'm named after a Thundercat. And I really am. And I am the writer and director and co-producer of Test Pattern.
Yes, thank you so much for being here with me today. So, one of the things I want to start with regards to the film is I always like to ask people their inspiration for creating a story, because everything starts with an idea. And for you, what was the idea and the impetus for you beginning this story and making like the discussion about rape and race be what you discussed for your very first debut film? It's a pretty heavy topic.
Yeah, I mean, as a Black person in America, I find that my existence is heavy. So I don't, I think for me, what I'm most interested in as an artist is expressing the complexities of like human existence. And, there's a lot of conversations around the concept of Black joy, that we don't do enough Black joy. Like, there's always these like downtrodden stories about Black people, especially in America. And I think both are extremes that are unrealistic. The truth is that in most moments, for I think Black folks, like we have great resilience and the ability to have joyful moments within really dark periods. I would argue being a Black person in America right now is an incredibly dark period. And yet I'm still able to live my life and navigate the systems that make life very complicated for me. So, therefore, any film I make, if I'm going to talk about Black people, is going to be complicated. It's not just this like very simple thing, because that is what our lives are. So there's that. So I think what I was most interested in for Test Pattern in particular, the nugget of the idea was like a combination of a lot of things that were happening at once for me in fall of 2017, which is I was thinking a lot about uh, women's bodily autonomy. I was thinking a lot about rape kits because I'd spent a lot of time researching the backlog, but discovering that the backlog wasn't even, the biggest issue with rape kits. It was the accessibility of them. I have a background in political science and sociology, and so I kind of see everything through that lens. And I noticed major policy failures due to the fact that, once again, the United States does not center it's vulnerable or it's marginalized. It centers cis hetero white men. So therefore, if you are not that, and the more you deviate from that, the more likely it is that you are going to fall through the cracks when you're trying to have any system work for you. So I just kind of thought that in terms of being a Black woman searching for a rape kit because she was a victim of sexual assault, that's a lot of like stuff coming together at once that I don't really need to create. That's just what it is. Like literally to be that person, there's a lot going on. The thing that I threw in there that I thought was important was having the foil be a white person, and I, especially in 2017, was doing a lot of thinking and talking about white allyship. One, because after Donald Trump was elected president, there were a lot of white liberals who seemed very confused by that. And to no one else's surprise, that really a thing. And I think it was the first spark for this particular generation of white allies, as you call them, to start questioning their role and educate themselves and like all of the inequity that's happening and like what should they do. And so I was paying attention to those conversations. Moreover, I'm married to a white British guy, and it's been a nice experience in some ways. What I mean by that is the fact that he's not American. It's nice because he doesn't have any skin in the game. Like, for me to be like, America is racist, America is upheld by systems of oppression like white supremacy. He's like, oh yes, I see that. And, I can accept that because that isn't really saying anything about me. And I'm this outsider. That doesn't mean that the UK doesn't have problems. I lived there for a while too. There's a reason why I'm back. But I think that I'm also really interested in interracial relationships, especially as sites of negotiation when it comes to power dynamics. All relationships have power, like imbalances, but I think one that isn't addressed enough or examined are the power imbalances that exist within interracial relationships, especially I think something as specific as white men and Black women. And there's tons of history in America for why that would be something worth exploring. And there's a lot of dark territory that comes with that. So that was the thing that I added that made it so complicated. I personally don't think that assault and rape should be considered heavy, taboo topics because they are so common in our lived experience. I think what makes this film heavy and complicated is the fact that we're adding all of these other things, but particularly the point of having to navigate relationships with white people.
Yeah, you touched on so many things. That a lot of it was what was occurring to me. First, I'm going to start with the political aspect of it, because there's a scene where it's not even a scene. It's basically there is a sequence for, I would say, the entire second act of the film, which is about the bureaucracy of trying to find a rape kit, and even just going to the clinic to be treated, and just even getting the beginnings of getting treatment, just to ask for help. Like, you got to do all of these steps. And I just kept thinking, politics affects us in so many ways, and in ways that we don't even realize until a situation like this, unfortunately, occurs. And you have this woman, Renisha, played beautifully, I think, by Brittany. And the word that keeps popping up in my head is uneasiness. And she's uneasy for so many reasons, but part of it is the bureaucracy, where she's realizing everything around me is failing. There's no one to support me. I'm going to this clinic to get help, and the people that should be helping me are failing me. They're not listening to me. They're not even looking at me, and they don't have the tests that I need to help me in this situation. And then there's the doctor. He's like, I'm unqualified. And I'm like, really? And then again, it's a white man, and it's white nurses, it's white women, and she's surrounded by all these white people. And then when you think about American politics, so much of it is determined by white men. So much of it is determined by white people. And they just kept thinking, ooh, like, to be a Black woman in North America, to be a Black woman in America, there's so many ways that like patriarchy and white politics affects us and affects women like her. And you're just like thinking, how do you navigate this? How are you supposed to be able to process all of this? And I think that's one of the most important things about the film, where you show how these small things, everything is almost like a domino effect. And it all starts some office where these politicians are coming up with some bill or some legislation, and then it goes down to a company where they're like, okay, we have these HR rules and regulations that we have to follow. And then you have the nurses and the doctors who have to follow these hospital regulations. And then you have the patients like Renisha, and like they're the end result of everything. But all of these actions begin at the top, and no one ever really thinks how these rules and regulations what's the word I'm looking for? Dictated by white people affects women like her at the bottom, right? And that's just kept thinking, like, it's like everything from for her whole experience, everything is just about how basically her life is being dictated by white people who don't even know her.
But again, that's by design, right? The United States was founded. Well, it was, but it was conquered by a whole bunch of white men
Mm,
and then established by a whole bunch of privileged landed white men who only really thought about themselves. And back then it was very explicit. Like the fact that even, the Constitution or Declaration of Independence only identifies human beings as men. Like if there's no inclusive language around that, the fact that women didn't have the vote, the fact that, there were negotiations for how to count Black bodies, the fact that we were not considered full people, it's all by design. So again, when I look at the situation that Renisha's in, it's not shocking to me. It's normal. I
yeah.
think that she's in a particular situation where there are a lot of things at play, maybe more than your typical Black woman on a typical Tuesday, but it doesn't change the fact that this is normal.
Yeah. And like I know online, like because I'm always on Twitter, and like we talk a lot about politics and stuff on Twitter. Everyone is always saying it's systemic racism. People, there's a difference, and I'm like, your film actually shows both systemic and systematic racism.
Mhm.
Systemic is where is ingrained in the system of how everything works, where it's such a part of the fabric of American society that you don't even notice it. Whereas systematic is where every single step is creating a roadblock, not
Yes.
only for success in work, but it's creating a roadblock for help. It's creating a roadblock for getting what you need. It's creating a roadblock for making your life better. And I'm like, like everything is one after the other. And like when I look at a character like Renisha, I'm just thinking, ooh, to be a Black woman is so hard.
Mhm.
And I think that's something I'll probably say more more during our discussion. But like your film really does show how Black women face so much obstacles, and like one of them is in the workplace. And in the beginning of the film, like she's having a discussion with her friend Amber, and they're talking about how politics of, and you mentioned Trump and the things, and his election has impacted Black people, and they talk about the politics and all of that. And then you see other ways that not even Trump himself, but also just the small ways where she talks about her work and she doesn't even define what her job is.
Mhm.
She, like, we know straight off the bat, Evan is a tattoo artist. He says that. But for
Mhm.
Renisha, she says, oh, I work in corporate. And
Mhm.
like, I wanted to know if that was deliberate, because for me, I'm like, in my head, I'm thinking that could be, is basically, she's basically any Black woman in corporate America. And she doesn't have to be working for Fortune 500 companies. She could be working for a small independent corporation, but the things that the obstacles that she faces and the microaggressions or even macro racial aggressions that she faces is something that many Black women will face daily.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think because of Renisha's experience in corporate America, getting an MBA, like, navigating all of these very, very, very like white male centric worlds, where there is a standard or a norm that does not include like our culture and our bodies. It's made Renisha incredibly, especially at that point when she's talking about her job on the first date, it's made her very guarded. I
Mm,
think that it takes a lot for Renisha to open up. And I think that's one of the reasons why she also wasn't specific in that moment, because she doesn't know who this man is. She doesn't want to say something negative that could give back to the wrong person. But it's also the other thing where it's like, does it really matter where in corporate America I work? It's all the same.
mm-hmm. Right. And like so this is, I think, a great segue to get into the relationship aspect of it. So for Renisha and Evan, I think they're very interesting in the fact that they may seem like total opposites, not necessarily with regards to race, but also their personalities, where Renisha seems to be a bit more reserved and Evan is a bit more open. And like one of the scenes, and I think it's a very interesting scene where the first time they're being intimate, he's kind of like taken aback, shocked that she has a tattoo on her hip. But then you see she has all. Then later we see that she has a tattoo sleeve. what was it? No, a sleeve tattoo.
Mhm.
And it's just like you see they do have these things in common, and then they also do have a love of dolls, and they have interest. And I wanted to ask you about building the relationship. So when you were developing the script, was there anything that you changed once you saw the chemistry between Will and Brittany that helped with that helped with you developing the relationship at the beginning, and then where the film would progress?
That's a really good question. No, I kind of did it the other way around. I cast Brittany first, and I had chemistry readings with other actors to kind of get a sense of like how she as Renisha responded to them. And in the chemistry reading for Renisha and Evan, played by, Will and Brittany, it just worked really, really well in surprising ways. I honestly wasn't anticipating it. And again, the script is really short, intentionally, to give the actors space to kind of create and expand upon, what I've given them on the page. And so we did do a bit of rehearsals together where, I just gave, Will and Brittany the opportunity to like improvise life together, which I do think is helpful. I would have loved to have done that for more than I was able to. But it's something that I think was a foundational practice. So it's just kind of like one day we all got together and I was like, well, why don't y'all pretend like, you just came home from work. It's not this particular day that's in the script. It's another day 3 years before then, and just feel it out. And then I was like, what does it look like to, have a conversation about like doing chores 2 years after this, like just kind of explore that. And that was me trying to establish the foundation between them. But the script never really changed beyond what they decided to kind of like improvise within it. So, when it was time to film the script or film the movie, we would look at a scene. It might be 3 sentences long with like 5 lines of dialogue. And I said, where point A is, where point B is. I don't care how long it takes you to get there. I don't care what other words you add. I just need like you just take the time that you need and you take the route that you want to take to get to the end of that scene. And so that I think also helps create like authenticity, and genuine kind of connection between two people, because they do have a lot of ownership around how to move around with each other.
Yeah, no, I think they did a fantastic job because they have an at the beginning of the film, which I think is super important because of how the story develops. They have this easy chemistry. Like you can like to me, they felt like genuine friends, and they felt like they were very comfortable around each other, and like they felt like I remember thinking when after they eventually got together, they moved into, I'm assuming this is Will's bungalow. That's what it's called, right? Because I called it a bungalow because that's what we
A
call it from
bungalow? Yeah.
yeah, was when they moved into Will's house as bungalow. Like the just even the setting, everything feels comfortable. Whereas where Renisha lived before was this high upscale condo where everything is, like clean and it's chrome and polished marble. And their house and the new house is filled with soft blues and like creams, and like it just looks homey and feels lived in. And you're thinking, and knowing what's going to come in the film, I'm just thinking their house is not going to be the same. It's going to look the same aesthetically, but the feeling, that feeling of comfort, that feeling of easiness is going to change. And which I think is one of the most impressive things with what you did with this film is how the tone of the film changes, and the tone of and the feel of their relationship changes as the film progresses. And I wanted to ask you, how did you go about creating this tone? Because for me, it was almost like this physical sensation I got watching it, where it went from ease and comfortable to being just quite this uneasiness throughout the film. And like even for the last shot, I'm like, their home does not feel like their house doesn't feel like a home anymore. So could you tell me a little bit about building that atmosphere and that theme with not only the actors but just aesthetically as well?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think for me, as a director, I'm always really interested in using all the tools in my toolbox besides dialogue to express a feeling or an idea. So, um, mise en scène is something that is an important approach and tool for me. And I think that by really paying careful attention to the color schemes as motifs, the sounds, the camera angles, the camera movements. You can change, something that's really bright and airy to something that's kind of fills you with dread with not much work. You change a color here or there, you put on a different lens. So it was just all really thought through. We knew where we were in the script when we were shooting it, and we knew that if this is supposed to feel, filled with tension, we have all the extra tools to make that happen. I think more specifically, something that is, I think, not really an afterthought, but it was intentional, but there's no intervention. What I mean by that is there's a lot of silence. And there's a lot of time where you're just kind of sitting with characters and processing things. And I think contemporary cinema, especially the commercial stuff, there's something happens, an explosion every other minute. And so there's not really enough time to think. And so if I'm sitting and letting the camera just kind of unfold things in front of you, you have the time to think about it. And you're the one that's creating that tension because there's something wrong. And so I think that's where the biggest kind of tool that isn't deliberate in the sense of me adding some creepy score or slow moving the camera. Sometimes it's just sitting there and letting you catch up.
Yeah, you mentioned the film does have a lot of quiet moments, and some of those quiet moments is because there's a lack of dialogue, or it's because they're just very still and not moving, like the scene where the day after what happened, she goes home and she's laying on the ground next to the bed, and she's just and I think Brittany, I honestly have to praise Brittany because she did a fantastic job with her facial expressions and just her little movements where she one moment she has her hand up by her mouth and you can tell she's in that contemplative state, and then the next moment she's just laying down and she just looks like she doesn't know what to do, and those moments are quiet. But then there's other moments where at the clinics and at the hospitals, because they go to more than one, where we don't hear anything from them, but we have the music, and the music is discordant, it's noisy, is unsettling. But then you putting you go from violin, screeching violins to Swan Lake, and I'm like, what? and I just think the way how you do build attention, and these things don't actually take you up, because you would think that going from one type of music to Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake, you would think, oh, this would take me out of it. But I'm like, nah, it actually plays and works really well. Could you tell me about the music that you and composer and Robert Ouyang Bruce Lee, how did you go through your music selections, and how did you go for picking the score for specific scenes and then using classical music for others?
Yeah. I mean, I think those are two separate things. So Rob was handling the score, and he was the composer for that. And so what Rob and I did was sit down and kind of just talk through the script. I think for any composer I had on this project, they would have to understand what it was before, and I shouldn't be the one to tell them. They should be able to know, because I think there's an innate understanding that kind of pushes the creativity. If Rob was spending a lot of time, or any composer, if they were having to spend a lot of time trying to catch up or trying to understand it all, that would get in the way of what we could kind of come up together with the music. So the first thing is, Rob read the script and he knew exactly what I was doing. And he was like, gosh, this makes me feel all type of ways. I'm angry, I'm icky, but also the stuff that you're saying about just men in general, I get it. So that's the first thing. The second thing that we did, once that was confirmed, is that we kind of broke down the scenes that we knew we wanted some sort of placement of composition. And we just kind of talked about what were the goals of each scene, and then I just let them go. I let them watch, all the cuts. I let them watch everything, ask tons of questions, and they went away and came back to me a few months later with with pieces, and we just kind of kept going back and forth from there. So that's how the score came together. The other thing I'll say is that I really wanted to make sure that we had certain sounds that were associated with certain emotional states and people. So like there's certain strings that are associated with Renisha, and there's certain strings that are associated with Evan, and there's a different sound when they're together, which is those two instruments coming together. That was important too. I'm trying to think what else. Yeah, I mean, in terms of, composition, I'd say that's the majority of what's going on there. But I get a lot of questions about Tchaikovsky, and that's a different department. Allison Rosenfeld, who is our music supervisor on this film, and just like all around good person, good friend of mine, she kind of knows how I like to use music in general. And I already had an idea about putting this like piece in that hospital scene, and that was really inspired by, I think, like Kubrick, honestly. And I was just kind of thinking about the ways he used waltzes, or the specific waltz in 2001 and what that kind of invoked, and I related to that, and that was the kind of idea that I wanted to go with, to communicate in that scene that, what Evan and Renisha are doing now is pretty much like a refined dance. They know they have the timing down. Everything is pretty, like perfect in terms of like the beats that they need to touch to get to one point to another point. But also it's like absurd, and that it's absurd that it's so mundane and so like performed or so rehearsed. So that was the idea with that. But, Allison and I talked a lot about if that was the right song, and we played with some other things. But ultimately that's the thing that felt really, really, really right.
Yeah, no, you mentioned the mundanity of it, and that's one of the other things I think that when we talk, like went back a bit to the politics, where these things, when you look at the bureaucracy and where these things have become so everyday, where like you have a woman like Renisha who's gone through an extremely emotionally and psychologically destructive event, and she is slowly breaking down on the inside, but on the outside she has to keep her composure, because we know, as Black women, like she's thinking, I can't be too loud, I can't lose my anger, I can't lose my patience. And you have her there trying to control herself, and then you have Evan losing his patience and getting angry and upset. And then on the other side, then like it's like a triangle, and then on the opposite point of the triangle you have the clinic administrator. She's like, oh, this is just a regular day for me, give me your ID. You have the nurses, oh, this is just a regular day for me, let me go and get the doctor. You have the doctor himself is like, oh, this is just another day, I can't treat you, so go to another clinic. They go to another clinic asking for a rape kit, and you think that would engender some kind of sympathetic or empathetic response for the person, like, okay, this is a delicate situation, let me watch how I talk. You're like, nah, go to the next hospital. And like you said, it's like, that's the mundanity. I mean, it's the absurdity of it. And that's like, even in my notes, I'm like, this is absurd that she's going through this extremely traumatic experience, and everyone is just treating it like she's asking for directions to the nearest dollar store. Like,
yep.
No, what, like, so when you have all of that underscored with like music from Swan Lake, which is one of the most well-known ballets, and then when you think about Swan Lake, which is about the dark and like side of a swan with psychological issues too, I mean, it's like, I'm like, it kind of makes sense, because it does highlight how absurd like things like rape are treated in society, where you would think that this is the moment she would get simply, people would want to take time to listen to her, but no one is listening to her. So she's kind of isolated and surrounded by everyone just like going about their daily lives. And going from that, so we talked to so you have the music underscoring all of that, but I wanted to ask you about the cinematography. I think it was very interesting the way you used lighting, and I wanted to ask you about your particular color choices, because you use pink in strategic ways, I think, in a few scenes. One is at the bar where Renisha meets up with the man who eventually assaulted her, and then she's in the car where he's taking her to the hotel, and she's bathed in like pink light. And so I want to ask about the use of pink in those, like if there's any particular reason you use pink. And then there's yellow. She was wearing yellow when the first day she's intimate with Evan, she's wearing a yellow dress. And then the day that she's assaulted, she's wearing a yellow dress again. And I wanted to ask you about the significance of the colors you use.
Carolyn, you this is the first interview I've had, or even review, where somebody's noticed that. Yeah, Renisha's color is yellow. It just is. That's what we've decided. You know, it was a combination of sitting with Ludovica Isadori, the cinematographer, Eloise Ayala, the production designer, and Brianna Rowe, the costume designer, and we picked yellow. And another color that you might have noticed, but you didn't touch on, is blue, and that's Evan's color. Which means that when Evan and Renisha are together, when things are good, it's green. And we also tried to kind of express that idea with like the foliage that's in their house. Like that's why there's so many plants and just like green things everywhere. But also like you'll see these separate kind of blues and yellows, and you know that that's their stuff. And then in terms of the pink, again, it was more of like an intuitive choice, as in that's just the color that I went for. But that color is associated with her soul. It shows up, that's where it is. And the idea also is that it's supposed to be like super saturated. It's like a very strong, evocative color. So now at any point when flashes of that moment come up, that's the color. You already know, if you see the color, what was happening. So that was the idea. And again, sometimes that can feed a very subtle psychological thing. Because if you remember in the opening scene, she's with Mike on that bed, and that color is everywhere. And then we don't see it again until we go to the bar. So something's kind of already in your deep subconscious, you know what's about to happen. So that's what's really great about color too.
Yeah, no, I noticed the blue because as I mentioned earlier, like their house, in his house, like the wall is like this sea blue, and then you have, it kind of reminded me of like a beach house, which I think is probably what I'm calling a bungalow. Because at home, like for most beach houses, especially for rich people, you have like they use like a lot of like light blues or shades of blues, and then there's like cream, and I'm like, it's comfortable. And then like you mentioned the pink, because yeah, the pink is in the bar, it's in the car, and it's in the hotel room, and even the hallway when she leaves, when she bubbling, like the lights on the wall are like this reddish pinkish color, which I was like, that has to be intentional, because I don't think I've ever been to a hotel where you have like fluorescent red lights on the wall. And like she does flash back to those pinks, and then I was thinking about it, like she never wears anything pink throughout the film, and no one else wears pink. And then with regards to Mike being blue, he does wear like his blue jeans. And then at the end, the very, very last scene where she comes home, the thought that came into my head is like their home is murky now, because like the wall on the outside in the veranda is like this mossy bluish teal color, almost like my wall. And the shirt he's wearing is kind of echoing that. And it looks almost like he was blending into the background of the background of the house. I'm like, yeah, he's lost. Like their relationship is nowhere around. And then with the green, you mentioned the blue, and that is in my notes too. Like when after the whole day, this whole awful day, she's in the bathtub and she's like bathing this grayish blue light, which is a color I didn't see surrounding her before. And he's outside and he's facing back in the camera, which I thought was interesting. And like the only hint of yellow is coming from a light, like just hitting his face like perfectly at this perpendicular angle. I'm like, yes, lighting, cinematography.
Yeah, Ludovica's good. She's really good. You know, like we talk all the time about like the intent and what I was trying to go for. And then, we'll make a plan. And then all of a sudden something will happen that I did not plan. I'll be like, Luda, what is this? And she'll be like, trust me, just trust me. And like, she's always right every time. But like, but I think that yellow light that you're talking about is a Ludovica choice that works really, really, really well.
To me, I saw that as after the entire day where he's pushing his thoughts on her. We'll get into that next. But I saw that particular moment where it's like he's finally thinking about, like you said, like yellow is Renisha's color. He's thinking, okay, wait, this entire day I've made this thing about me. I've been making it about what I want. I've been making it about what I think she should do. And like the light hitting, it was like almost like this, like a light bulb moment. It's like I need to think about what I've done for the
Mhm.
entire day. And I
Mhm.
just thought that was just, it's such a small, but I think a very important moment considering the whole context of the entire film.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's like I was like, one thing with films, like especially films like this where we don't have a lot of dialogue and a lot of is told through not only the actors acting but from the lighting and the direction. I just love when films give me like those kind of moments where it's almost like a still shot and like a
Yeah.
snapshot. You can tell the entire story from that one scene. You have for Evan, it's that scene, and then for Renisha, it's her in the bathtub, and then taking out her braids. And I was like, yo, for a black woman, like to be taking out her braids so easily, I'm like, yes, she has been through a lot. She's fed up, she's done, and she wants this entire day to end. And I was like, I think only a black woman would understand the significance of her taking out her braids.
I agree. Again, I've had a lot of questions about that, but usually it's never like I know what that's about. Usually it comes from white people and they're like, what is that about? It seems significant. And I'm like, well, it's kind of not, but it is, but not in the ways that you think it is.
Yeah. Yeah, because I was just thinking, like, I'm like, her braids are all the way down to her butt. So she sat in that chair for like a
A
good at least 10
minute.
hours getting her braids. And for a woman to be like, I'm just gonna randomly take out my braids, my newly freshly done braids.
Mhm.
I'm like, yeah, she's fed up, she's done, she's over it. She's just like, I was like, yes, I feel you. I'm like, take those braids out. But so we're gonna get into now to the day, that awful day. So it began well the night before where Renisha and Amber go to a bar and
Mhm.
they meet these two guys. And Amber to me is an interesting character because she's someone that I know. I've encountered women like her. Like when they meet a cute guy, they're like, oh, I want to like let's hang out with these cute guys, and they're kind of like ignoring you. You're like, nah, I'm not feeling it. I'm ready to go home. And
Mhm.
they're like telling you, no, like my enjoyment matters more in this moment, even though they're supposed to be celebrating Renisha's new job. She's like, I want to hang with these white guys. And you're like, and I'm like, I've been in situations like that where my friends do not want to listen to me. And then she's thinking, then the whole gummy bears, and she's like, oh, it's sweet. I'm like, do you know that is sweet? Who's
Mhm.
that's me? You're assuming, like, you don't know if that's poison, like, you don't know if that's arsenic. Like, girl, we live in dangerous times. So I want to ask you about Amber and that particular scene and how you went about building the scene and
Yeah.
working with the actors, because I just thought it was interesting where like when we talk about assault, like we always say it's not the victim's fault, and but then there's something in the back of our minds where we're always thinking I shouldn't have done this, I shouldn't have taken the gummy bear, I shouldn't have drunk. But then when the way you structured it is like a lot of things happen because of peer pressure, and it's not you're playing a blame game, but it's like that's the reality of the situation.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few points that I'm making. The first point is you're allowed to wear whatever you want to wear. You're allowed to drink as much as you want to drink. You're allowed to do whatever drugs you want to do. You can be flirty, you can dance with people, you can kiss people, you can do all those things. It does not invite or justify rape
Mhm.
at all. So I wanted to create a very typical condition for which those things occur, to challenge the audience and remind them that she can make those choices and what happened to her in the end still shouldn't have happened.
Mhm.
And I think that it also adds to the victim blaming that survivors do sometimes, especially in situations like this where it's not so explicit. But I feel like victim blaming actually goes on in all cases. Like even if you're walking down a dark street, you're going to blame yourself for walking alone in the dark. Like victim blaming is very much a part of the experience and the culture that our society upholds. Like we're always very, very, very quick to blame or question the victim.
Yeah, no, it's something that's ingrained in us. And speaking from the perspective of a Black woman, like growing up like I grew up in the Caribbean, but even like for North America, like I know like there's something that would be like as young girls, we told to watch our behavior from very, very young. We're
Mhm,
told to
mhm,
dress modestly or don't wear shorts too short. You're
mhm,
like, don't show even if you don't have breasts yet, but like don't show your chest too
mhm,
too much. don't be too fast.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
See, that's a lot of responsibility for women.
exactly, right? And it's like you're always telling yourself, but why should I have to watch the way I dress
Exactly.
when the person who is leering at me is you should be addressing things and you should be telling them watch the eyes,
Exactly.
the eyes up, what mind the business. And it's like for like you're saying, the message is like we are supposed to be able to do all of these things without having to worry about what could possibly happen. And I remember like when I turned 14 and I started to go to house parties. My brother, who's 10 years older than me, he sat on my sister and I one day and we were getting ready. He was like, girls, let's sit down. Because it's my twin sister. And she was like, girls, we're going to sit down. We're going to have a discussion. And he's like, he gave us this long list of tips on how to watch ourselves when we go out. Like when we go party or even go clubbing, even if we just go to a fair, he's like, if you go to some place for drinks, don't let anybody open drinks for you. He's like, if you put a drink down, don't take it back up. Get a new drink every time. He's like, it's gonna cost money, but you don't want to take the risk. And he was like, if you see a guy with like a long fingernail, watch him because he's probably has drugs. And he was saying that guys would put like drugs underneath their fingernails to slip it into their drinks. And he's like, but like always be aware, look, and sometimes still do now, like always look for exits whenever you go someplace. We always talk about how Black parents have the talk with their sons, and I'm like, yeah, but we girls get the talk too. Our talk is something.
Absolutely, you're exactly right. And think about how that adds to just like all of the extra stress and complexity of Renisha's existence, like head on a swivel, constantly worrying about her own protection. And now when we think about how, Amber fits into that, Amber's, also has I mean, as I think that's an easy kind of misunderstanding, but, the reason why Renisha went out that night was not to celebrate her new job. It was to like go spend time with her friend that needed to vent. So the whole night was surrounded around Amber to begin with. Amber's stressed and tired, clearly is not enjoying work right now. So she needed to vent. She wanted to get loose. She wanted to have a nice time. She wanted attention from men. She was fine with that. And she needed Renisha to be there with her while she did it. I've had friends like that too. I've been in experiences where I'm like, I'm really not feeling this. This is a skeezy situation. I really want to go home, but I also don't want to leave my friend here.
Yeah, because that's the girl code. Like we come together, we leave together, right?
Yeah. And so I think there's an element of that too. And the concept of protection is that like, I don't think Renisha wanted to leave Amber alone, even though she needed to go home and maybe didn't feel great about the situation. And that's something that I think I also tried to kind of communicate when they're on the dance floor. Like she kind of keeps turning to Amber and checking in on her as Amber's getting more and more like out of control but like she has no like ability to stop it or be present with it. She can only just see it. And I think that's a really like sad and I don't know, vulnerable place to be in.
That sense of isolation is something I think that carries through for the rest of the film because it starts there in the bar with her watching Amber, and this is when the drugs begin to take effect. Like she begins to lose lucidity and she begins to become more disoriented. And there is that sense of isolation where everything is happening around her. And then like eventually she's taken to the hotel and these things happen to her. And then the next day again, she's like with the way how the scenes are framed, like she's usually off to the side or by herself, and like Mike is not Mike, sorry, Evan is watching her, and then Amber's on the bed, and there's that sense of isolation. And then for the rest of the day, as they're going to the police station, all these things, everything is happening around her. She's almost like there's a word I'm looking for, and it's not isolation, where she's almost
detached.
Yes, she's detached, where that you can tell where she's just like not only mentally but just physically, she doesn't feel present in any scenes, which I think I don't know how you did it, but it was done so well, where it felt almost like Brittany was just floating and she was just like, I'm just here, and everything is happening around her. And like and I think that's something when we talk about things with like assault or abuse, where like you have victims will say, I just felt like all of these things were happening to me. And I think you telegraph that really well in the film. And it also shows and it comes up a lot with regards to race, because she's this lone Black woman and she's surrounded by all of these white people. At the bar, it's only her and Amber, and then once Amber starts to fade into the background, it's just her and these white guys. And then the person who rapes her is white. And then at the clinic, she's surrounded by these white guys. And I thought it was interesting where at the beginning of the film, like once they came together, we got these happy moments with Evan and Renisha, where they're living their life as a couple and they're talking about their dolls, they're talking about their daily lives, talking about what outfit she'll wear for the first day of work. And then she's in the car, and then we got a flashback again to her outside, isolated, waiting for Mike. He turns up 15 minutes again. He doesn't understand what she's saying. She's like, I'm uncomfortable. You left me here. And he's kind of like almost brushing it off and said, I'll do better. And I'm like thinking, but will you? And then you go into the backyard, and lo and behold, more white people. She's like, again, this black woman alone and isolated, watching all of these people around her. And I just want to ask you about how you're discussing race without actually discussing race. And I wanted to ask you about creating those scenes and that structure, and like and we're able to weave this discussion of race. Because people say, oh, I don't want any preaching. I'm like, you don't preach at all. Like you're just laying the past, you're just showing this is how it really is.
Yeah, but I think that's it right there, right? I personally, as an audience member, I don't like anything preaching at me, and I don't really understand the point of it. Like, I'm less convinced by the film being emotionally authentic or like intellectually correct if they need to go through all this work to prove to me that it exists. I think humans are humans. We all are kind of motivated and, made up of the same things, especially when it comes to psychology.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not hard to ask the question or to explore the idea of a Black woman feeling uncomfortable in at a barbecue full of white strangers. I don't need to talk about it. I don't need to even say it because it's obvious. It's so obvious. And I think one of the things that the movie does so well is very rarely are we watching movies that actually center the internal life and the psyche of a Black woman. It just doesn't happen. Even when movies are about Black women, a lot of times the filmmakers are really concerned with like how white people are going to understand it or process it. So there's an extra explanation, or the point of view is slightly shifted so it can include them. And it's like, you do that, you fail, because just center the person, just like white people do. We've been able to empathize with white people. We can understand what white people are going through because they're completely centered. So just do the same. So that was the idea. And I think that's why the concept of it not being preachy is successful, because people are just living with her. They're just fully seeing her. It didn't take much. You put Renisha in the middle of the frame, you eliminate any and all other people, you reveal a whole bunch of white people who are also looking at you and touching you and commenting. Like, that's the other thing about that scene that I love so much. They don't talk to her like a human.
No.
Like, they're like obsessed with how beautiful she is. Like, it's shocking. It's like, oh my God, like a Black woman, and she's beautiful because like that's the point. Like, no, that's not the standard of beauty. That's not the default assumption. So, and like, I hate that. I hate that so much.
Listen, I feel it so much because when because it starts not only there, but it's also from it begins in the bar too, because the guys that come up to Amber and to Renisha, they're commenting on their looks.
Yep.
And they talk about, oh, you're so beautiful, you're here, whatever. And I'm like, you have that, and then you have the barbecue, and it's like, I've been there, like my hair's short, but when I had like long hair, we'd be like, oh my God, your hair's so beautiful, and like going to touch my hair, like this, the bodily autonomy is not recognized at all, and that's something we have to reinforce. And again, that's one of the things that the film is talking about with regards to race and consent, because you're thinking that consent applies to the rape, and I'm like, not only rape, it applies to everything. It applies to how people approach her, how people speak to her, how people touch her. It applies to how Mike is treating her. He completely ignores what she wants to do and how she's feeling because of what he wants. I'm like, these white people keep foisting their wants and their needs on Renisha. And I'm like, that's consent right there. That's the discussion of consent. It's not only about assault, it's about just existing as a Black woman in white spaces.
That's right, Carolyn. Ooh, yes.
Let me tell you something. I was like, ooh, I'm like, these white people. And it's like and like, and then again, as a Black woman, I'm thinking, am I being too hypercritical? Am I being too,
No.
you have these thoughts? I'm like, am I being too harsh? And I'm
No.
like, nah, we've experienced these. We know what we're talking about because this is real life. Like, it's on screen, but I'm like, this is very real. These are situations that we encounter daily. And then if you have to, like you said, you put it with regards to adding a white man who's like, it seems like he's supportive. Because he's like, you have to be tested it. Because, like, I think he's almost like this. The word that's coming to my head is oxymoronic, but it doesn't make sense. But that's where I'm going to go with. Where you're like thinking he's not accusing her in their discussion. He's not accusing her. His conversation is he's speaking to her very calmly, and he's like, it starts with him being very understanding. But then once he gets the idea of there needing to be a test, go at that they need to be tested, which she should be tested, but he's not inquiring if she's ready for it. He's not inquiring like what he's not thinking what this test entails, because we as women know what a gynecological exam is like. He's not thinking how invasive a rape kit is. He's not thinking about, again, she has to open up herself to a complete stranger to invade her personal space emotionally, mentally, psychologically, all of these things, physically. And he's not thinking she just went through this traumatic experience where someone ignored her wants and needs. And I'm like, sir, you're doing the same thing, but just from a more almost you're caring, but you're not caring enough, and you're not caring in the way you should be. Right. So could you tell me about that part of the script and that part of the film, and how you went through that with Brittany and with Will, with regards to creating that the slow dissolve of their, because I saw that as a breakdown of their relationship, because I'm like, I don't know how their relationship is going to survive after a day like that, especially after his behavior.
Again, it wasn't hard. So let's go back to the first date. And it's interesting. There are quite a few people out there who do not like the fact that Evan gets to be with Renisha. They think it's unrealistic. They think that they don't think that she makes sense, and that she would just never choose someone like that. And it's funny because those people never ask me why she did, or where in the movie does that kind of reveal itself. And to me, it's really obvious. They are having dinner and Renisha's cagey about her job, and she's kind of slowly opening her up to talk about what she wants to actually do with her life. And she polices herself. She kind of stops herself from really getting into it. And she says, I don't know what I'm talking about. And Evan says, I think you always know what you're talking about. And I think that's like great ingredients for all love, right? To see another person fully. Looks like Evan saw her and was listening to her. And
he listened.
Yeah. And I think that's why it went further. And I think that's the thing that holds their relationship together, that she does feel seen and heard. So if that's what the foundation is, all Evan's got to do is not see and hear her, and then the thread is pulled.
Yeah. And I thought it was an interesting flip for their relationship, because like when they go to be, he's taking her to be tested, the idea to be tested comes from him. She doesn't say, I want to go to the police station. She's just needed quietly. And I think it's interesting because this is another scene where she's isolated again. They're at Amber's house. So she wakes up from sleeping and you hear her talking. And I put it in my notes. I'm like, that's just like any conversation in any house where you're in your bedroom and you hear people talking about you in the living room, and you're like wondering, what are they saying? You're being nosy, like, my brother's talking about me and my sister's talking about me, and then lo and behold, they are talking about her, and the conversation eventually becomes more clear. And I'm just thinking, this is something that happened to her, but you're not talking with her about it.
That's right. Right.
And Amber comes to the decision with Evan, okay, let's go to the police station. He never wants to ask her, what do you want to do?
Yep.
He never asked her, I don't think he ever asked her if she's even in pain, because like you never, like, she could have been physically in pain. He never says that. And I just thought that the way you did that switch in his personality was very, I think, was genius, because he does it with the same tone that he speaks to her always. He
Yes.
doesn't change he doesn't become angry, he doesn't become upset. You would think he's having a regular conversation with her, but then you're like, no, you're
Yeah.
using almost the same cajoling way to get her to go along with you. And I'm like, sir, pause.
Well, let's just be real though. That isn't a change in his personality. And that's the other thing I'm trying to say about like humans. Like we're motivated by a lot of things. And I think as that relates to white allyship, when it relates to like allyship amongst like non-female feminists, men in particular, um, it takes a lot to constantly be present with the fact that you should not be centering yourself, that you should be centering the person you're allied with. And Evan was in a particular moment of vulnerability and stress. And those are always the times when you'll see people who are even like, you know, even like if we think about like athletes, you like the whole point of like an elite athlete is being able to like maintain like perfection despite like the high levels of like stress and pressure. But like all human beings really struggle with that. It's hard to stay on the right track when you've got all those other things going on. Which another, by the way, just sidebar, which is why I think like Black people are so incredible, because we've been under so much just shit. And yet we still manage to thrive and find ways to live. And it's beyond me. Anyway, so there's that. But going back to how that like applies to Evan, you know, so he slipped. He got a little more selfish. He stopped thinking about the fact that he's not thinking about someone else, namely the person he loves that he's trying to protect.
Mm.
And I think that there are other like societal factors that come into that. I think that, you know, straight men feel like sometimes that their masculinity is in question if they're not doing the right thing as a man to protect, you know, their woman, whatever that means.
Mm.
So I think that there's probably some of that in Evan too, thinking, well, no, someone's got to protect her. Someone's got to bring this to justice. So it's going to be me. It's my job. And I think that he gets more and more frustrated because it's not panning out. And he's seeing that as a reflection on him.
Mm.
The whole thing is a reflection on him, which is
Yeah.
crazy. So yeah, I think that's always there, you know, in his personality. It's just that, you know, he hasn't been in a situation where those things are kind of put under great strain.
Mm. And could you tell me about with regard when you cast Brittany, because you said you had the idea for her for this role from the beginning. When you spoke to her about this and when she saw the script, and was there anything that you guys discussed with regards to what would happen and how she would play this? Because like she does such a fantastic job, as I mentioned, with the little moments and with her expressions. And could you tell me a little bit about like during production and filming, like what kind of conversations you guys had to create those moments, especially the moments where she's feeling so isolated? Because I just can't get past how she just feels so isolated, and it just translates so well to screen.
Yeah, I think, I mean, again, she's a Black woman, I'm a Black woman. There's a lot that's shared and understood, right? So it was more about getting Brittany to kind of unpack those moments for herself when she felt that way, or just to talk through things with her, um, then kind of like preparing. I think a lot of this stuff, like for her, was absolutely kind of like innate, you know? Like I think it was more about trying to understand who Renisha is as a person. Like, what are the things that were motivating her to be open to an idea versus not, or to let her hair down at this point or not. But yeah.
Yeah, no, I honestly can't get. I think because even though I know the film was done in like released in 2019
Mhm.
at festivals, I just think I would say it's one of my favorite performances from an actress that I've seen probably going from like last year into this year. And it's funny to me that some of my favorite performances from Black performers, I wouldn't even say just Black performers, from any performer, um, over the last year has been where people are in, where you can tell the actors are in touch with the characters because they relate so much to them. And I have to mention like Steven Yeun in Minari, and then and even talking about Chadwick Boseman in Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. And I kind of drew a parallel from his one of his monologues where he talks about his father becoming a vigilante for his mother, for the mother's rape. And I kind of thought about Evan in the same way, where Evan was so concerned about getting justice for Renisha, where he didn't think about what happened, and he kind of left her to flounder on her own, the same way that Levy's father did to him and his mother. And I just thought it was like a super interesting parallel that I drew. And then like other performances, Judas and the Black Messiah, and Andra Day in United States versus Billie Holiday. And I just thought, I'm like, all of these performances that I've gravitated towards are by these actors and these actresses just getting really in touch with these emotions. And then it's just like situations that we, even if you don't personally experience them, but you see you enough experience enough things where you can see just a bit of your own history in them. And I just think that your film is just one of those, because I've experienced some of these situations, and I'm like, I've been in some of these spaces. And I just think it's beautiful when you have like directors and writers like yourself. And I know people say a lot, especially as critics, who say we put the human experiences on the screen. But I'm like, it's important, because sometimes watching these kind of situations on screen does help us to process, and it does help us to like speak to other people. Because like you could use this film, you talk about allyship, and you can show this film to a white man and say, do you notice anything wrong? Like, what is wrong with what he's doing? Mm-hmm. It's almost like an instructional video. And it's like, can you tell me what Evan has done that you think if you were ever in a situation, God forbid, you should do? What would you do differently? Right?
Exactly.
Seriously, it's just like I can imagine like my mom would say, what would you do differently in this situation? That's my mom all the time. What would you do differently today? Have you learned your lesson? And when we're talking about allyship, sometimes you gotta be like, white people, this is not what being an ally is about. Don't center yourself. Being an ally is listening. Being an ally is like, that's like you said, like Evan failed as an ally, but he also failed as a boyfriend. He failed as her partner.
Mm-hmm. Sure did.
I remember thinking when I watched it, because I watched it twice, like people, I can clearly see people watching this film and say, but she's making it about him. But I'm like, no, the way I see it is, it's very much about Renisha. But it's a film about how everyone around her fails her.
That's right.
And like we talked at the beginning, we talked about the politics. Every support system around her that's supposed to help her fails her. Because even if you look at Amber, Amber in a way kind of failed her too, because she let Renisha go off by herself. Renisha was looking up for Amber, but Amber wasn't really looking up for Renisha. Mm-hmm. And then even at the end, when she does come back, she goes to the hospital. It's interesting that the only people that really do show her compassion at the end are two Black women. You have Amber, and then the nurse at the, where she does get the rape kit tested is performed by another Black woman. And this is the first time anyone has told her, you don't have to do anything you don't want to do. Mm-hmm. And she's like, if you don't want to say anything, you don't have to say anything. And she thanks her, and she says, thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to me. And I'm like, it's so important that we have, where again, that's sisterhood. That's like Black sisterhood, where we're like, at the end of the day, we only have us to turn to.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, again, it's about seeing a person fully, right? And I think Black folks have been taught how to empathize and see everyone else. Mm-hmm. But they don't see us. Not all, like they have to be taught. and that's scary, right? So in some ways, Amber did mess up, but this is going back to, how we're all human and we're under great stress. Amber called Renisha because she had a bad day at work. Mm. I think Amber has a lot of bad days at work. Mm. And maybe Amber didn't have the capacity to even think about another person. It doesn't mean that, like, again, she gets a pass. Yeah. But it's to recognize that. And, the same thing goes for the, staff at the hospital. They come off as cold because it's another day for them where they're getting paid very little and are very overwhelmed. You know what I mean? Like, they can't even take on feeling anything for you, on top of the fact that they're white and they probably don't even see you. So there's a lot going on there. So yeah, I think Nurse Peg is someone who's very good at her job. And a part of her job is to be compassionate to all people. Um, but I think also she's a Black woman. So she just saw her.
Yeah. So before we wrap up, because we've been talking for a while, before we wrap up, I wanted to ask you about the names and for you to tell me if my interpretation of the name kind of wrong. Like you heard test pattern. The first part is test, and like obviously you're thinking about the rape kit, like she's getting for a test. I was thinking, how absurd is it that a woman has to be tested to prove that she's raped? And how ridiculous is it that for something as traumatic as that, Black women in general, but in this we're talking about a Black woman, she has to give quantifiable proof of this terrible thing that's happened to her. And then there's the pattern part of it where we talk about the systemic and the systematic ways that everything around her is failing and the racism in politics and everything. But then it's just, these are things that happen every day to Black women. Black women are assaulted and raped and abused every day. And like, there's a pattern to everything. Like if you see her, this situation with Renisha is going to happen again. And so I wanted to ask you about the name.
Yeah. So the name, so a test pattern is, back in the day with TV channels that are off air, sometimes you would see the color bars. That's a test pattern. And the idea, or even before like a VHS tape or something, but that's what you use to adjust kind of like the focus and colors and the receiver of your television screen. And I see this film as a placeholder for people to kind of dial in and adjust their perceptions and assumptions and ideology and politics. So that's why it's called test pattern, but it's convenient because those words do evoke those other thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we're gonna wrap up, and I want to thank you so much for speaking to me today. Sorry, Shatara. Like this was a great discussion. I'm so happy that I got this chance to speak to you. And is there anything you would like to say about the film or about any future projects that you have coming up?
No, I just want folks to keep watching it and keep talking about it. It's been so nice to hear your thoughts on it. It's been good to talk to another Black woman, and it confirms a lot of the things that I thought you saw a while of it, which is great. So thank you.